Recoverability is where you gain the greatest insight into the operations of your firm. Recoverability can be defined as the percentage of work performed that converts into billable revenue after adjusting for write-ons and write-offs. Put more simply, it measures how effectively a firm turns effort into cash. Now, I've got some examples lined up here that we're going to take a look at, and there's two things we're focusing on. One is our write-ons and write-offs, and that's in the perspective of our WIP equation. So from our opening WIP through to our closing WIP, we're going to have write-ons and write-offs, or net write-ups as they're called. That's one part of recoverability. The other part is looking at recovered rates. And how we do that is we take that write-on and write-off information, and then we look at how many hours went into the work that caused that write-on and write-off, and then we can calculate our recovered rates. I've got some examples lined up where we're going to look at both of these, and then at the end we'll look at pulling it together and talk about why we want to do this and how to implement it in your firm. Cool, so we're familiar with the WIP equation, which is opening WIP, time added, disbursements added, invoiced, net write-ups, and closing WIP. So we just add all of those rows together. Invoices are negative because they reduce work in progress. So if we add them all together, we get our closing WIP. Right. So this first job here, we've added $3,400 of time to it, and we've invoiced $3,000. So we've ended up with a write-off of $400. So that's low recoverability, right? We've written off some of that time. Whereas job 2 here, we've got $1,900 of time. We've invoiced $3,000. So there's a $1,100 write-up. So I had great recoverability. So that's looking at recoverability on a job basis, but we can also look at it on a team member basis. So we've got two team members here. We've got Kate and Ted. Now for a month, let's assume all things equal that the jobs were started at the start of the month and closed at the end of the month. So we've got no opening or closing WIP. Just want to keep these examples nice and easy. So let's say Kate in this month added $27,500 of time to these jobs. We invoiced $30,500, so there was a $3,000 write-up, so she had good recoverability this month. Whereas Ted did $26,300 of time and only invoiced $23,400, $2,900 write-off on his jobs. So looking at this information, we could say that Kate had a good month, Ted didn't have such a good month, so we should talk to Ted about lifting his performance. But we want to dive deeper into these numbers to see what's going on. And this is the real magic of recoverability comes into it here when we start diving into the numbers. So if we look at this next example, we've broken down where those numbers came from for Kate. So she had 8 jobs that she worked on, and then we can see here that we've got some that had write-ups and some that had write-offs. So you can see that she's got a job at the bottom there with a big write-up of $2,300, so in total $3,000. So a pretty good pattern here from Kate, so we're pretty happy with her performance. Now if we look at Ted, we've got a very different story that's being told here. Ted actually got write-ups on all of his jobs except one. This job at the bottom here, he put $6,400 of time to, but we only invoiced $1,500. Now the reason for that was because the partner underpriced the job. He didn't anticipate how big it was, he didn't ask enough questions, underpriced the job, so Ted ended up having to write off so much time on this job, which would have affected his capacity, would have affected his ability to deliver other jobs, would have affected so much. But overall, he's had to write off $4,900 of time. So if we were to just look at Ted at a monthly basis and say, hey Ted, you wrote off almost $3,000, you had a bad month. Ted's actually had a great month, but there was a job that was underpriced. So that's why it's really important to dive a little bit deeper into the numbers to see what's going on. And again, this is the magic of recoverability, is there's so much information here. So if you see write-offs, it's a really good reason to have a good conversation. It's not a reason to come down on someone. You need to investigate why they're happening so we can fix the problems. So this is looking at recoverability using the work in progress formula. But what we can do is we can elaborate on that. We can start bringing time into the equation. What that does, it starts allowing us to calculate more things, such as recovered rates. Next example here, what we're going to do is we're going to remove parts of the WIP formula and we're going to bring in some time data and see what we can calculate from here. So we've got the WIP formula, but we're not interested in opening WIP, disbursements, invoiced, and closing WIP. So let's get rid of those. And instead, we want to include recoverability, revenue, hours, and recovered rates. And I'll explain what each of these are. So recoverability is the same as your write-up percentage. So it's basically the percentage of time that we've written up or written off on these jobs. Now, revenue is calculated by taking the time within the period and adjusting by the net write-ups in the period. So it's not the same as invoice. And the reason for that is because invoices don't always fall on the same period in which we do the work. So if we have a client invoice for $10,000 one month and there's no time in that month, how do we attribute that revenue to the time? We can't. So instead what we do is we take the billable work done and we adjust by the net write-ups and write-offs recognized within that period. And that's how we calculate our revenue. So it's very important we understand that. So that's how revenue is calculated. Then we just look at the hours, the number of hours required to arrive at that time. And then from there, we can arrive at our recovered rates. So let's pull some figures into this. So let's say Ted's billable rate was $200 per hour, and that's how we arrived at all of those time values. We've got our net write-ups, which were pulled straight from that WIP report, but now we can calculate our recoverability, which we could also call our net write-up percentage. We can see here that he's had pretty much write-ups on all of those jobs, except 76.56% written off on that last job there. So then we can calculate our revenue, and then in this example here, the revenue does match the invoice because I've tried to keep the example nice and simple. But if we do have WIP flowing in and out of different periods, that's where revenue is the only way to calculate these rates. So then we've got the hours. The hours were the number of hours used to generate that time. So if we look at the first job, Ted's billable rate is $200 an hour. So 10 hours gave us $2,000 of time. Pretty straightforward, right? So that's $10 higher than Ted's billable rate. And that's represented by that 5% recoverability. See how these things are starting to tie together now? And if we look at this last job, we only charge $46.88 an hour for the job. And that's where we can start analyzing this data to understand at a team member level or at a client level or at a service level, what rate are we actually charging for this work? The reason that recovered rates are really powerful and not just looking at the recoverability percentage and also the write-offs is because write-offs are indicative of billable rates. So in this next example here, what I've done is I've lifted Ted's billable rate from $200 up to $600 per hour. So we've tripled that rate, which means the WIP created or the time added in the formula or in this equation is going to be triple. And then what's going to happen is we invoice the same amount because Ted's created the same amount of value to the market, right? He hasn't done more, he hasn't created more value because we put his rate up. It just means we've put his billable rate up, and that comes through in his write-offs. So let's take a look at this. So now Ted's rate is 3 times higher. So all this time added is going to be 3 times higher than the previous example. So now we've got huge net write-offs. Our recoverability is at negative 70%. So we're writing off 70% of his time. The revenue hasn't changed because that's the what we're able to bill. So if we were to take the time added, adjust by the net write-ups, we arrive at the same revenue figure. So that hasn't changed. The number of hours hasn't changed. Therefore, our recovered rates have not changed. And again, that is the magic of using recovered rates, as it cuts through all the noise of having recoverability percentages and our write-ups and write-offs. So why is recoverability important? So the first thing is the recoverability looks at how effective our team members are. So if we're just interested in productivity, that's a bit of a trap, because what we could say is we could have a junior who spends 8 hours of his day, full 8 hours, 100% productive, looks great, but he spends 8 hours doing a task that should have taken 1 hour. So although he was 100% productive, his recoverability was awful because we would have written all of his time off to arrive at maybe $20 or $15 an hour. So that's where we need to look at both recoverability and our productivity to get an understanding of what's going on. So we can't just look at productivity alone. Recovered rates cut through all the noise, so that's why we don't want to just look at what our write-offs are and what our write-off percentages or our recoverability percentages. We also want to look at those recovered rates because that's going to cut through the noise of what our billable rates are. So recoverability allows us to determine how effective our team members are at doing their work, which helps inform decisions such as pay rises. So if we've got 2 team members and we look over an entire year for all the work they've done, all things equal, and one's at a recovered rate of $250 an hour and the other one's at a recovered rate of $150 an hour, we could say, well, this person on $250 an hour should probably be on a higher salary because they're delivering more value and generating more revenue for the firm. So that's looking at it from a team member perspective, but from a client perspective, if we look at our entire client list in one report over 12 months, we can look at all of their recovered rates and we'll find at one side, if we were to sort from high to low, at the top of the report, we're going to have really high value clients, $800, $900 per hour and a whole lot of work done for them. Or at the bottom of the list, we might find clients we've done 50, 60, 70 hours for at $10 an hour, $15 an hour. So what we can learn from this is we can look at the top of the list and go, what are we doing well for these clients? Who's working on these clients? What services are we delivering? Why have we priced them this way? Then look at the bottom of the list and go, right, we need to lift these clients' fees to come up to the middle of the pack. So That insight really helps you look at your client base and determine whose fees need to be lifted and which clients we could learn from. So how do we implement this in our firm? So the first thing is we need to use a practice management system that's going to track time, invoice, and give the ability to analyze your write-ons and write-offs and calculate our recovered rates for us. Now then, what we want to be doing is we want to be focusing on reporting on our people, our clients, and our services. So conveniently, it's PPP. So first is our people. So we want to be analyzing our recoverability and our rates per person. The next thing is our pricing. So the clients is our pricing. So we want to look at all of our clients and how we've priced those services and what rates we've arrived at. And that's the next step. And the last one is to look at our process, which is looking at our services. So if we look at all of our services and what rates across the whole firm we're achieving for each service. So if we can get our people working effectively, and we can get our clients priced effectively, and we can deliver our services effectively, we're going to make a lot more money in our firm. Now, if you found this video useful and you'd like to see more of these, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, as we are going to be pushing out a lot of content around this. We've only really just scratch the surface of a lot of these concepts, and there's so much more. Think of it as the tip of the iceberg. There's 90% is still below, and I want to explain all of that. So head along and subscribe to the YouTube channel, and leave me a comment under this video of the part that you found most useful. And if you do have any questions, drop that in the comments as well. My team and I do read all the comments. That helps us create more practical and useful content for you. So thanks for hanging out, and I will see you in the next one.